Over the weekend, social media users, ever the detectives that they are, discovered that the results to the question, "What do terrorists wear on their head?" actually yielded some pretty egregious answers on Google. Before we published any articles on it, the top 2 hits said that what terrorists wear on their head is the Palestinian kuffiyeh. Now, if you don't believe me, go ahead and Google it for yourself, but in the meantime, I'm going to tell you a little bit more about the real significance of the kuffiyeh and other tactics used to brand Palestinian resistance as terrorism. The history of the kuffiyeh, which is also known as a hatta, goes all the way back to ancient Mesopotamian times, where people wore the scarf as a show of wealth or property. Through history, that meaning changed a bit, and the kuffiyeh was then most prominently worn by laborers to keep the sun from burning their head and face. Now fast-forwarding, the modern history of the kuffiyeh begins. In the 1930s, when the Arab revolt really took hold in Palestine, all classes of people began wearing the scarf as a means to avoid arrest and disguise themselves. Like I said, before this, the scarf was more so used by the working class, so the Arab revolt marked the start of the kuffiyeh as a symbol of both unity and resistance. In 1948, roughly 10 years after the Arab Revolt, the Nakba, or the Great Catastrophe, began in Palestine, and thousands upon thousands of Palestinians began to be forcibly removed from historical Palestine in an ongoing ethnic cleansing campaign by the Israeli occupation. The Palestinian uprisings that have occurred since that time, such as the Intifadas and the Great March of Return, have continued to see the kuffiyeh as a show of Palestinian strength and a testament to the indigenous people of historical Palestine. So, no, to say the Palestinian kuffiyeh is a symbol of terrorism is basically to criminalize the entire cause. But actually, this is not the first time that has happened. In the last month, over 230 Palestinians were killed by Israeli occupation airstrikes in Gaza and shooting campaigns in the West Bank after residents of an East Jerusalem neighborhood called Sheikh Jarrah were told they would be forcibly evicted from their homes in favor of Israeli settlers. It's a human rights issue caused by 70 years of a violent political and military occupation. But Facebook didn't see it that way, and now activists are reporting that their content is being removed for violating community standards. Facebook also removes all content that has to do with hate speech and terrorism. But both of these things work against the Palestinian cause, as Facebook is currently deciding whether or not anti-Zionist posts are anti-Jew. If they do this, this effectively silences all Palestinians or Palestinian activists seeking to criticize the Israeli occupation. Facebook removing content that has to do with terrorism might sound like a good idea, but who gets to decide who is a terrorist and who is not? Many Western countries designate Hamas as a terrorist organization, but in fact, the Palestinian people democratically elected Hamas in 2006, and many see the group as a liberation organization, especially because Palestine is not allowed to have a military. Now, those are just 2 of the ways that the Palestinian resistance is branded as terrorism, but of course, the list goes on. Hopefully, this video gave you a slightly better idea of how Palestinians are misrepresented in the world, and if nothing else, the next time somebody asks you what terrorists wear on their head, you'll at least know that it's definitely not a Palestinian kuffiyeh.